So I wanted to do a video about the moon in the Rider Waite Tarot. And one of the curious things is 78 cards, and I think for many of us on a spiritual or a pagan path, the moon is a really powerful, important symbol, and yet it's actually on surprisingly few cards. So I thought I'd talk about the concept of the moon, particularly in the Rider Waite deck. So let's start off with the moon itself. There is that big moon dominating this card. Now, I know a lot of people read this card as sort of psychic abilities and dreams and mystical, spiritual stuff, and it can be all of those things. But let's really have a look at this card for a minute. The moon is dominant, but there's something strange there that we can see that almost the light seems to be shining out of the moon. It could easily look like a sun if we're honest. When we think about the moon, what's important to remember is the moon does not shine, the moon reflects. And when something is reflected, it is not a true image, it is distorted or shifted, reflected. It's different. And I think we often forget this because we're so used to seeing our own image in the mirror that we often imagine that's how we really look to other people. But of course, the image is reversed. And if you want to sort of really understand this, go and read something in the mirror or try and write something whilst looking only in the mirror but not at the pen and paper. And you'll quickly realize how used we are to our own images in the mirror and how odd it is to see something truly reversed and reflected. So to me, I often think about the moon as fears, illusions, delusions, and not seeing things clearly. And just to take you through this a little bit further, we have the crayfish down here. Now, Arthur Waite describes the crayfish as primal fears. And then we have this path. And if we have a look at this path, it goes past the wolf and the hound, and it also goes past two towers. Now, we know that towers represent structures that give us a feeling of security, but in time trap us down. So to me, the whole point about the moon is to not get paralyzed by fear here on the path, and to not get drawn into feelings of full security, but to keep following that path. And when we look at the path, it seems to be one of those paths that goes up and down with multiple false horizons. You've just got to keep walking. And for me, very often with the moon, it's about acknowledging that you don't have all the information. Things aren't complete. In a house move, this might be you don't have all the information that you need. I recently read for somebody who's making life decisions about a business, and I was like, you don't have all the information you need right now. So to me, the moon is often a bit of a blocking card. Take a break, reflect, don't make fear based decisions. Be aware that there might be something you're not seeing completely at this point. So to me, that's my most usual take on the moon. It can be to do with dreams, it can be to do with psychic awareness, it can be to do with hormones. It can have lots of readings. But to me, this concept of a moon that looks like it's shining, with this idea of fear and, false sort of ports in a storm, it is about don't allow what you think is a threat to define your decision at this point. So moving on to the Eight of Cups, and if we look at this moon, just like in the moon card, we have a moon that appears to be shining. Here we have what we know to be an eclipse. So I mean, I can't promise that my sources are accurate, but I certainly trust them. The sources that I've read suggest that Pamela Coleman Smith painted this card around about the time there was an eclipse. People often see this card as moving on and letting go, and I think it can be that. But if we look at it again, this person, they've got red boots on, a red cloak, they're holding a staff, and they are walking to a higher perspective. And the moon here is an eclipse. To me, rather than simply saying this is letting go or moving on, this is about looking at life from a different perspective. Will they choose to move on or not? I don't think is implied in this card. I think you would need another card to be certain. To me, the sort of the eclipse there is the strange light of an eclipse, allows us to see life for in a different aspect, if you like. So to me, the fact that that's an eclipse, it's about looking at life from a different perspective. I'm going to look at these two cards together because I think they are similar. And I think seeing them together allows us to see the similarities. To me, the High Priestess and the Two of Swords is all about water and moon. In the High Priestess, obviously, her dress becomes water, and behind the pillars and the curtain, we have the water, possibly the same water that we see in the Two of Swords. Who knows? So, to me, this is about switching off our logical brain, which is indicated by the Two of Swords and the way that those sort of like I'm switching it off, and connecting to our intuitive, our heart, our higher self. However, you would like to frame that, your psychic self, it is about that deep connection. And I think the moon can reflect that, and the water can reflect that. The High Priestess, just looking at the moon imagery, we've got the the sort of the threefold goddess up here with the phases of the moon representing maiden, mother, crone, which is a concept that I know a lot of pagans, myself included, work with. This idea reminding us that the moon changes. The moon is ever changing. I know the sun changes too, but the moon changes slightly different. It's this growing and this disappearing. It's fascinating. And then we have this concept of the moon down here with the water sort of falling into it. To me, it is this idea that this high priestess is ruled by, is probably not the quite right word, but she is, her dominant function is her intuition and her emotional self. Um, and I very much relate that to the Two of Swords. This idea, I've closed off my mind, I've chosen to put a blindfold on, and I'm feeling in to the pull of the moon and the sound of the ocean. To me, these cards are about making decisions on an emotional or an intuitive base. And I don't get any of the fear that I might get from the moon. And I think what unsettles me here, apart from the crayfish crawling out, is this idea that the moon almost looks like it could be a sun. And then moving on to perhaps the strangest of the cards with a moon image is the Chariot, where the moons are worn, and they almost seem to have faces on them, to be honest. The moons are worn as armors on his shoulder. And to me, this is about using our emotional self, because to me, the moon represents our emotional self very much. And another way to understand the moon in tarot is to look at the moon in astrology, where your moon represents your emotional self. To me, this is somebody who is projecting their emotional self out, who is using it to sort of clear a path. They're not integrating their emotional self. They're not fluid and going with it and accepting their emotional self. They are projecting out. This might be somebody who feels really anxious but doesn't want to say they're anxious, but will accuse other people of being anxious as a way of managing their anxiety. Or, of course, the classic phrases of "you made me angry, you made me feel like that," instead of acknowledging how maybe they've been triggered or their own emotions. So to me, the Chariot, I always think when I look at that, he's got a bit of a chip on his shoulder. He thinks everyone else is responsible for his emotional well-being. He's less comfortable integrating that within himself. So, what I would say is, if you're doing a reading for yourself, and if you notice that there is a moon image on your reading, and even more if you notice that you do a reading, just scooch it up so you can see all of them. If you do the whole point about tarot cards is the cards have images. Okay, sometimes I think we get so caught up in keywords and understanding that we forget that. So if you're doing a tarot reading for yourself or for someone else and you're looking at the cards and you go, "Ooh, 2, 3 moons," notice that there aren't that many moons in the Rider Waite deck. So I hope you found that helpful. If you enjoy my videos, you can, of course, buy my book. This is available. It's a big book. I warn you, it's got a lot of writing in it. You can get it direct from my website or you can get it from Amazon. And I do Zoom courses online. Um, they're roughly about an hour. Sometimes they run over if people have questions. They're all recorded. It's lovely to have people live, but I fully get that sometimes work or time zones means that you can't join live. So they're recorded and you get the video the next day. So if you're curious about my work, do head to my website and see how we can connect and work together.